Own Your Truth with life strategist Laura T. Real advice for regular people. Now, here's Laura.
To Own Your Truth with Laura T., where we're talking real advice for regular people. So, as I mentioned at the start of the season, each month I'll be interviewing someone living their truth and creating a life experience their way. Tonight is one of those shows, and I am thrilled to spend time with renowned speaker and best-selling author Bob Burg. A little background on Bob. Bob is the author of a number of books on sales, marketing, and influence, with total book sales of well over 1 million copies. His book, The Go-Giver, my favorite, co-authored with John David Mann, has sold over 925,000 copies, has been translated into 28 languages, and has sparked a series of books, including The Go-Giver Leader, The Go-Giver Influence, and Go-Giver Sell More. Bob is a sought-after speaker at company leadership and sales conferences where he shows large and small companies that conducting their business in the Go-Giver way not only provides greater value to their customers, it increases profits as well. And we're going to talk about that tonight. It's also important to mention that Bob is an advocate, supporter, and defender of the free enterprise system, believing the amount of money one makes is directly in proportion to how many people they serve. He is also an unapologetic animal fanatic and is a past member of the board of directors of Furry Friends Adoption Clinic and Ranch in his hometown of Jupiter, Florida. Bob, welcome to the show.
Laura, great to be with you, my friend.
I am so excited to have you here.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I always love talking with you anyway, but, getting to talk with you and a whole bunch of new friends, that's even better.
Oh, you are so sweet. So if you don't mind, at the beginning of the show, I love to share how I've met my guests. And our meeting is one of my favorites because, and I think I shared this with you before, I was in real estate and a friend of mine said, you need to read The Go-Giver. Like, you will love this book. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I put on my list of books to read, and then another person mentioned it. And then another person mentioned it. And I was like, okay, yep, it's on my list. All right, I've got to read it. Well, my good friend Mary Beth bought me the book and said, here, you have to read this book. I devoured it. I loved it so much. And subsequently, I'm on the phone with my cousin and I said, oh, Terry, you need to read this book, The Go-Giver by Bob Burg. She's like, Laura, I know Bob, right? I'm like, oh, what? And come to find out, you were a Natick High School graduate, and we know each other.
Yeah,
and so
she's one of my all-time favorite human beings.
Oh, so sweet. Well, so I know that I reached out and have just been a huge follower and fan, and I just can't say enough great things about you. You're just amazing online, in person, amazing.
Well, thank you. And I've enjoyed following your career, and you've done such a fantastic job. So I'm very excited for you about your show. I think that's great.
Well, thanks so much. Well, I know that we want to dive in because I had so many questions. I had to really narrow them down and try to stay focused. So, I know a lot of my regular listeners have read The Go-Giver, but for those who haven't, can you provide an overview of this really wonderful parable?
Oh, thank you. And it was co-authored with John David Mann, who you were kind enough to mention him earlier, and he is really the lead writer / storyteller. I mean, I'm a how-to guy. I'm step 1, step 2, step 3, and I'm pretty boring. John is a brilliant writer and storyteller, so it was really a fantastic collaboration, and I was very grateful to get to work with him. And it's about a guy named Joe, the average Joe, right, who is a good guy, and he's a young, ambitious, aggressive salesperson who's really looking to do great things. But his focus is very much on himself. He's very much I-focused or me-focused. And as hard as he works, he can't understand why he doesn't have the kind of success he thinks he should have by now. And he ends up meeting a guy, very successful business person named Pindar, who kind of mentors him and introduces him to some other successful people. And Joe comes to realize, and this is really the basic premise of the whole story, that shifting your focus, and this is really so key, Laura, shifting your focus from getting to giving. And when we say giving in this context, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing immense value to others, understanding that doing so is not only a nice way, a pleasant way of conducting business, it's the most financially profitable way as well.
Love that. And I mean, there's so many great pieces of information throughout the story about the importance of giving. I know one of the things is, I think about the increased demand on people's time and the onslaught of information that comes at us every day. How do you recommend people stay focused and consistent on the go-giver way?
Well, I think it's always a matter of asking yourself, how can I do something, whether it's something you say, something you write, something you send, a connection you make for someone. How can I do this in such a way that it's going to mean a lot to them, and it's not something that's going to be onerous on my time, right, too, because you're right. It is. We all have a lot to do. And so, I think one mistake people sometimes make is they decide how they are going to add value to others, and they make it sort of a one-size-fits-all, when what we have to remember is that value is always in the eyes of the beholder. So it's learning about that other person and learning about their needs, wants, desires, and how you can help them, how you can make a difference for them in a way that they see it as being of value. And that's when you can do it in a way that's very effective and not time consuming.
That one important distinction to make is giving in the value is, always in the eye of the beholder. Any tips or tricks that you have that help people understand how someone else may view the situation? I know it's easy for us to kind of take it from our own perspective. What are some tools or tips and tricks do you use to help understand someone else's, what would be of value to someone else?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's very natural for us to believe that what we would find to be of value is what others would find to be of value. And it's just not necessarily so. We all see the world from our own vantage point, if you will, based on our own belief systems, our what I call an unconscious operating system, right? Which is a combination of upbringing, environment, schooling, newspaper, what you read, what you hear from others. And so we tend to believe that other people see the world and value certain things the way we do. And again, it is not necessarily so. And that's why we have got to ask questions. And we've got to ask questions and just not assume that other person sees the world as we do. It's sort of like when you see when a salesperson's doing a presentation and they say, well, what I really love the most about this is, and that's a nice spot, but really who cares what they like the most about it? It's what the other person likes the most about it. And we only know this through asking questions and then listening, really listening.
That is the greatest gift, is to have someone really listen to you. Great point. So let me ask you, you've spent time in sales. I'm sure you've come across sales training that focuses on like scripts and push past the pain, cold calling type techniques. How do you recommend someone stay in alignment with this go-giver way, take that extra time to understand someone's value if they're in a culture where the focus is more on getting the sale than providing value? Oh, I hear the grunt.
Right. No, in other words, the leadership, what you're saying is the leadership has them focused on, really on the numbers itself, not the value that they're providing.
Exactly.
So I think there are a couple of elements here at play. The first is that, sure, an unnatural script, is obviously very uncomfortable. And it's difficult to do something like that and sustain it. If it's uncomfortable, it's difficult to sustain, and it's not effective. So,
right.
So that's the first part. It's not necessarily that a script in and of itself is a bad thing when it comes to the sales process in terms of just so you feel comfortable with what you're going to say. It's sort of like, Laura, if you go to a play and you see those fantastic actors on stage, right? None of them up there are simply winging it night after night.
Right.
So, saying whatever comes into their head. all those men and women up there, they have rehearsed it and rehearsed. I mean, they know it. They know that part so well that they're not even acting anymore. That is them. And that can be very valuable, because the more that you know what you're going to say, what you're going to ask, what different responses might be, the more you can take the focus off of yourself and actually focus on that other person, right? Because you're not having to right. So if it's a script that honors the other person, because it's all about how you can add value to them and communicate that value, that's a fine thing. But it turns out, an unnatural script and having to push past the pain, cold calling, that's torture. That is very difficult for most people. It's just not going to work on a long-term basis. So hopefully you can educate the leadership that, not only is it not comfortable, but it's not productive. But let's say you can't. Well, now you have to, of course, decide, are you willing to stay in that organization? You can't always just leave. So what you might need to do is develop a presentation or a script or what have you, where it is going to be more in alignment, where you're able to ask questions, you're able to find information. My friend Art Subcheck, who probably is well, I'll say one of, I think he's the best in the world in terms of teleselling and teleprospecting. And he has a book called Smart Calling, and that's what he calls these kinds of calls when you do it correctly. It's not cold calling, it's smart calling. Mm-hmm. Right? Because you're doing as much of the discovery beforehand as you possibly can. These days, there's no reason not to. To learn as much as you can. The days of asking someone to tell you about their business, those days are over, right?
Right.
You need to go into it already knowing, and probably, depending upon what you do, already having the insight that can help them see things that maybe aren't even there, or that they don't even know are there, so that you can help them. So when we smart call, that's a whole that's a whole different story. So you stay focused, you stay consistent in doing things the go-giver way when it's always about the other person. Nobody, and I often say this when I speak at a sales conference, and I don't say it in a dogmatic fashion. I say it more as a way that it's a joke because everyone knows it is, and that is that nobody is going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet, right? They're not going to buy from you because you need the money, and they're not even going to buy from you because you're a really nice person, right? They're going to buy from you. And we all laugh because it's true. We all know that as salespeople, right? They're not buying for our benefit. They're going to buy only because they believe they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And that's the only reason anyone should buy from you or from me or from anyone else, because they believe they will be better off by doing so. When we keep that in mind, Laura, now we're 9 steps ahead of the game in a 10-step game. Right. Because we know everything we do in that process needs to be about the other person.
Love that. Such an important distinction, really looking at those scripts that honor the other person and this idea of smart calling. I bought Endless Referrals first. And so can you describe how you describe this book as a how-to book for bringing potential customers to you? Can you share how your approach to connecting is different from what other people typically think about networking?
Well, what's interesting is I've been speaking on this topic for a long time. And when the book first came out, it's been out now in 3 editions. And the first one came out in the mid-'90s. And back then, I think I was one of maybe 3 or 4 authors on networking. Now there's tons of them, okay? Mm-hmm. And many of them are just great books. I learned something from all of them. And I think most of us who write on the topic, we understand networking as being something that's very, very focused on the other person. But what's interesting is that I still see people and hear about people doing this, and whether it's online or face-to-face, what have you, you still see people thinking that networking is all about, glad handing and backhanding and slapping hands and shaking hands and saying things like, let's do lunch, and, basically people hitting everybody else up for business, or what we call people trying to sell each other hats.
Right.
And it's really ineffective. And so I define networking as simply the cultivating of mutually beneficial give and take, or give and receive, win-win relationships. The key is to focus on that other person from the get-go, or from the give-go, in that very, very first conversation. And but many of the people out there who teach networking, whether it's people like Dr. Ivan Meisner of BNI, who really just has made such a positive difference in the way that networking is seen worldwide, because he has such gigantic reach and has done such a wonderful job. And people, whether it's Susan Rowan or I'm just trying. I hate to leave anybody out, because there's so many great teachers on the topic. But I think that's really what it is. People like Tim Houston, that when people approach it the correct way, Laura, it's a very lucrative way of doing business, but it's also a way in which you totally take the pressure off of yourself, because your focus is on the other person. And the best way to do this is to worry less about your elevator speech and instead focus on asking questions that immediately engage this person and make them feel good about themselves, about the situation, and about you.
So
if you want, I can go through a couple of these questions if you'd like.
I would love that, because I was just about to say, I know you are the master at this, so please share a couple of questions that you use.
Well, you meet someone for the first time and you ask them what they do, and they're going to probably, they're going to give you their elevator speech. And so just, listen politely and take it in and appreciate it. And that's fine. That's what they've been taught to do. And we'll pretend in this case, the person's name is Gary. He sells copying machines. I always use that example, just easy to do and easy to remember. And he tells you, he says, I sell high-end copying machines for Acme Office Products. We help people to blah, 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 what have you. And then he says, what do you do? And again, I'm going to suggest forget about the elevator speech. Just say, I'm a realtor with Oceanside Realty. Boom, that's it. Because right now, remember, when you first meet someone, right now, their level of interest in you and in what you do can be summarized in 3 words. They don't care. Not right now. They care about themselves and their business. So let's go with that, and let's make that the focus. So I have these questions I call feel-good questions, and they're not prospecty, they're not salesy, they're not intrusive, they're not invasive. Again, they just make that person feel good. That easily establishes a rapport and communicates value right away with that person. So the first question you might ask Gary is, how did you get your start selling copying machines? Or a little bit more elegant way to put it might be, how did you get your start as an office products professional? And this is not a clever question. It's not a slick question. But in fact, it's very mundane. But people love answering that question. Why? Because you just made them the star. You basically said, I want to know about you. I want to know how you got here. I want to hear your story. And this is something that this person is not asked to share. His own family does not ask him to share that story, okay? And here's someone you just met who, rather than doing what everyone else does, trying to hit him up for your product or service, you're asking him to share his story of how he got started. And he's going to really appreciate that. The next question is something along the lines of, what do you enjoy most about your work or about what you do? It probably sounds more like, wow, you must have had some fascinating experiences, Gary. Tell me, what do you enjoy most about what you do?
Great question.
And again, this is a feel-good question, right? It flies with the face of a lot of traditional teaching where they say, well, immediately find their pain, right? Reach into their heart and tear it out, right?
Right.
And, right now, this person's just not ready for that. Now, depending upon what you sell, there might be a time, again, when you're presenting for him or what have you, that you might need to tactfully help him share his pain so that you can help solve it with your products or services. But that's not now. Right now, this is just not the time for that. So I'm going to say, instead of finding his pain, find his joy so he can associate you with that joy. So you've asked a couple of these questions, and the rapport has begun to build, and now I'm going to suggest asking what I call the one key question that will separate you from practically everyone else this person's ever met. And the question sounds something like this: Gary, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good potential client for you? Okay. Or Mary, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good prospect for you? Or how can I know if someone I'm speaking with would enjoy knowing about you? Okay, so in other words, what you're asking him is basically, how can I help you attain new business?
Right.
Okay. Again, it's the question that really separates you from someone else. Now, a good way to lead into that question is to say, Gary, I always enjoy connecting good people with other good people. Tell me, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good prospect or a good customer for you?
What terrific questions to really get people talking and build that rapport. That's so necessary before you have any type of business interaction with them.
Sure.
Fantastic. Those are great. Well,
thank you.
So looking at one of your other books, Adversaries versus Allies, essentially this is how to win people over without manipulation or coercion. Great title. In that book, you have a chapter that stood out to me: How to Say No Graciously and Effectively. Love this because I work with a lot of clients who naturally givers have a hard time saying no. So can you talk about why that's important and how do you use that to complement the go-giver way?
Sure. Well, I'll talk about the end of that first. It complements the go-giver way because we're placing our focus on the other person, making them feel good about themselves, genuinely, okay, as opposed to saying no in a way that's going to be a turnoff to another person, or giving in and doing something we really don't want to do, which is, not something I would recommend. And as you said, it's difficult to say no sometimes because as human beings, we tend to want to please others. We don't want to say no if we don't have to, but it's very dangerous to say yes to things you shouldn't be saying yes to. We only have a limited amount of time and energy and so forth, so we do need to pick and choose where we're going to place that. And, being a go-giver should never be confused with being a martyr or being self-sacrificial. If someone asks you to do something and you really don't want to do it, I'm assuming it's not life and death, then no, you shouldn't. Let's, as an example, say someone asks you to serve on a committee.
Great example.
And you just don't want to. For whatever reason it is, it's not something you want to do. So how do you say no in a way that really honors that other person and still respects your boundaries? And there are a couple of ways that have been taught that I'm going to bring up, not because I want to disrespect any other way of doing things, because it's not necessarily that my way is the only way of doing something, but I don't feel these are productive, and yet they're taught so often. And one of them is the advice that, well, no is a complete sentence. And I get the intent. Okay, I get the intent. It's that you shouldn't feel like you have to do. But to say no is a complete sentence, I don't think that's productive. Because first of all, if someone asks you to do something, again, like serve on a committee, obviously they think highly enough of you that they're asking. So to just say no, that's not a complete sentence. At least not if you want this person to feel as though you respect them, right, to not shut the door on other opportunities you might have that you might want. Plus, saying no that way is, I'm going to suggest it's not congruent with your value system, which is treating other people with kindness and respect. So I don't think that's a good way. Another way that's taught is to kind of fib a little bit by saying, well, I would, but I don't have the time. The problem with that, as I see it, is that it's, first of all, it's not that you don't have the time. It's that you just really don't want to do the thing as much as you don't want to do the thing. And so, and I think people know that. So so it's not that you don't have the time, and it feels a little yucky to kind of to fib and so forth. And plus, if you do that, when the person persuasively shares with you why time will not be an issue, now you're really stuck. Mm-hmm. Because now you either have to admit that you were kind of fibbing because you don't want to do it, which is going to make them respect you a little bit less. And again, you're going to feel, to use the technical term, yucky, okay? Or what you need to do is, in order to save face, you need to take the assignment. You need to serve on that committee, which you don't really want to do. So, again, I don't think that's a great option. So I don't think, fibbing or making up an excuse is also, I don't think that's productive either. So here's how to do this. And I just share this with people, that if you'll practice this a couple of times, it'll absolutely set you free when you want to say no. And you can always feel great about it. The other person will as well. And it's simply to say this. Again, the person asks you to serve on a committee, and you say, thank you so much for asking. While it's not something I'd like to do, please know how honored I am to be asked. Okay, and now you can change the words around a little bit to suit your style. It might be, oh, thank you. While it's not something I choose to take on, please know how grateful, or know how honored I am, just to be asked, however you want to say it. But basically what you've done is you've thanked the person, okay? You thank them. You did let them know that it's not something that you're going to do, and you let them know how grateful you are, how honored you were even to be thought of like that by them. So you have totally honored them. There's no way that person can be offended,
right?
And you kind of set yourself free. Now, Laura, if the person kind of comes back one time and says, oh, but we really need you to, and so forth, just listen patiently, don't interrupt them, just have, an air of calmness, without any defensiveness. And then when they finish, pause for a moment and then just say, oh, I appreciate it. I don't believe so. But again, thank you so much for asking.
It's a great way for people to be able to own their truth with kindness. Mm-hmm. Such an important distinction. This is so amazing, and I know that we've got a lot more questions to continue the show. Right now, we're going to take a brief break for the Own Your Truth Musical Artist of the Week. This week, I am thrilled to feature Lee Silvestri. My regular listeners have heard his sound before because he was the first musical artist I featured on my show. And when I thought about the essence of being a go-giver, there was no one else's music I could play tonight. Not only is Lee a talented musician, he's an outstanding person. He embodies the go-giver in everything he does. He's generous as a musician, often opening for and playing alongside others. And he's an amazing person, constantly looking for ways to help others, including being a catalyst for the Own Your Truth podcast. So I am so grateful to have Lee as a go-giver in my life. He's someone whose friendship is a gift and whose music will calm your soul. Without further ado, here is Lee Silvestri, Lost and Found.
Remember asking me what makes us so. Remember thinking I could will it. A heart of gold, just a lump of coal. I couldn't say. If I were you, I'd take shelter in the sound. And keep the faith when there's trouble all around. You gotta go and get lost before you can be found. that's what they'll say. Go touch your toes down to the bottom. That and all the other sordid sweet cliche will get you drowned. If I were you, I'd take shelter in the sound. Keep the faith when there's trouble all around. Take a dive, but remember solid ground. You gotta go and get lost before you can be found. Doesn't it sound easy? Like it might release me when the words are in a song. It feels like an open letter, like maybe I know better, and I'm not the one who's wrong. But I am, and I don't.
Welcome back from the soothing sound of Lee Silvestri. Now we're going to learn more about Bob and his philosophies. So, Bob, there is so much great information out there about you. Again, it's narrowing it down for me. I heard in a podcast that you were in sales yourself and on the verge of finding a regular job to pay the bills, and you adopted a one more call philosophy that changed everything. Can you talk about that philosophy?
Yeah, well, yes, actually, a story. And by the way, before I start, that was great from Lee. He's really fantastic. He does Connecticut proud.
Yo, thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
I enjoyed that a lot. So I tell the story about when I was probably almost 3 years into being a speaker. And, the speaking business is a business like anything else. It's basically sales, right? Because you have to sell your speaking engagements. And when you start out, pretty much like anything else, you are everything in your business. You're the product or service. You're the salesperson. You're the bookkeeper. You take out the trash, everything else. And so for the first few years, I followed a system that I had learned how to book myself as a speaker. But the challenge is I was always kind of behind the eight ball in terms of, I'd make some, I'd sell the engagements. I'd be out there speaking, make some money, come back. There's no business. I have to resell. It was that constant
roller coaster.
Yeah. And it got to a point where, the outflow was much more than the income. And so, it was getting to that point. I was thinking, am I going to have to get a real job, right? And maybe do the speaking part-time. And I really didn't want to do that because I was loving this business. I really was. I found what I wanted to do. And it's funny, about 6 months earlier, one of the speakers, a very successful speaker, who spoke at the National Speakers Association conference that I had attended, told the story about how early in her career something similar had happened, and she found herself going through the help wanted ads to maybe take a part-time job, which she didn't want to do. So I'm sure this is the case of a lot of speakers who are just starting, or any entrepreneur who's starting their own thing.
100%.
Yeah.
I hear it a lot.
Exactly. So it was kind of coming down to the wire, and it was a Friday, and I remember saying to myself that if I didn't book an engagement today, I was going to have to seriously go through the want ads, probably get a job in sales that I could do, and then maybe speak on weekends or do some other thing to whatever I'd have to do, I'd figure it out. But again, I really didn't want to do that. And so I was calling, and we had one of the things we used back then, and this is, again, many years ago now. There's so much of the marketing you can do from directories online, but back then it was two very heavy books. It was the National Trade Professional Association directory and the State and Regional Association directory. You kind of went through and so forth. But so I was making the calls to those in my markets that I was working and so forth, and I mean, nothing was happening. I was getting really depressed, and it was the end of the day, and this was it. I mean, it's over. It's 5 o'clock. I'm going home, and when I say 5 o'clock, I mean 5 o'clock Pacific time. and I mean, I was making calls as long as I could, but but it was that was pretty much it. And then I remembered something I used to do when I was in sales back when I first started. And what I would do is at the end of the day, after the very, very last call, whether a phone call or a knock on door kind of call, what I would always do is make one more call. And so again, this is after all the calls were done. I'd make one more call. I didn't have to make a sale, didn't have to make a good connection, didn't have to advance it to an appointment. That wasn't about it. That wasn't what it was about. It was just making one more call. But it was always interesting how often that one more call would turn into something. So I decided, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make one more call. I don't care who it's to. I'm just going to make one more call. And I kind of, about as random as I possibly could, I turned a page in the National Trade Professional Association directory, and it was a particular association. It was the Professional Golfers Association, the PGA of America. Now, I'm thinking they have what I do has nothing to do with them. The people who are on TV golfing, right? Now, At the time, by the way, I was actually teaching a memory course, okay? This is what I did the first few years of my speaking career. I basically taught a memory course before I went into the networking. I was teaching how to remember names and faces and all these different things. And so, yeah. And so I thought this has, obviously nothing to do with them. But I made the call anyway. And what the person was doing there that late, I didn't know, didn't expect anyone to answer, but a very nice woman answered the phone. And I said, is this the PGA of America, Professional Golf Association of America? She says, yes, it is. And I said, well, and I told her what I did. And again, just not expecting anything, Laura. It was just the one more call. And she said, well, what's interesting, Bob? She said, these people, who I take care of are not the people you see on TV doing the golfing. These are the golf pros who manage the golf stores at the country club.
Okay.
And she said, and not only do they badly need to remember the names of people who are their customers and who they teach lessons to, and who but they get continuing education credits. And we have a whole list of speakers. And I think your program sounds great. Would you like to be listed in the directory?
Wow.
Yeah. Now, so Laura, I got to tell you what happened. That over the next 3 years, and what they had is they were called sections as opposed to state associations. They were sections, and they had something like 42 of them that covered all 50 states. There were 42 sections with some of the states combined. And I think I worked something like 33 out of the 42 over the next 3 years. And back then I wasn't making the kind of money for, a talk as maybe today, which is many years later, but it was definitely enough to keep me in business so that I could hire someone part-time. It made it easier for me to kind of keep things as they needed to be. And it basically kept me in business.
So it really is that one more call. And I have
one more call.
I have to admit, when you heard me go, when you were talking about teaching a memory course, I've heard you speak live a couple of times, and I am always in awe of how you introduce yourself to every single person, and then you go and say everyone's name. The first time I saw you do it, I think I was in Philadelphia. I was speechless. I was like, what? And you knew every single person in the audience. It's amazing. And talk about making people feel special. I mean, that's really an awesome, awesome gift.
And it's just a learned skill, too. It's just a system, because I was the world's worst. I mean, I was horrible at it before I learned how to do this. I took that course because I was so horrible at it, and I remember I bought the person's tapes. That's how long ago this was, by the way.
The tapes.
He had tapes, not CDs, but tapes.
There's hope for me.
Yeah, buddy. But yeah, so it's just, learning a system like anything else, and I worked at it and learned it and got good at it and made it kind of part of the whole thing that I did. I don't do those anymore, by the way. The remembering people in the audience. As I get old, at 61, I'm just not willing to do that. It's too much work.
Well, I think it's just because your audience have gotten so big that it's just I mean, really, can you really remember all of those people? I think the time I went, it was like a small, 400 people. I mean, it wasn't a small crowd. I don't know if there were that many people. I don't know how many names you usually remember.
Yeah, and I didn't, it wasn't all of them, but it was. I used to, what I would do, and even when I spoke at the bigger events, I might meet 50 or 60 or 70 people, and what I would say is, for them, the ones who I met, as long as we got to exchange names with each other, please stand up and stay standing.
Okay.
And a whole bunch of them were up. So it was a lot of people, but again, it actually was easier than it looked if you knew how to do it, like anything else. But to do that now, it's just it's still a lot of work to do that.
Right.
Remember all those names. It's really not difficult, but it's something that
it takes some effort.
Again, as I get older, I don't put that kind of effort into it anymore.
That's awesome. I like to ask each of my guests about mastery. What do you think it takes to master a craft?
What it takes to master a craft, I think you've got to be willing to do the thing, whatever that thing is, over and over and over again, to be open to where you're not doing it correctly, because practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. We all know that. So a person must be humble enough to accept coaching, and to be able to just keep going at it until they get it. I don't think it's one of those things that's, and you hear this phrase a lot, it's simple but not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Because you think about it, just about anything you want to do, someone has done it before. They've documented how to do it. If you step into the system of doing it, you'll get it. I define a system as simply the process of predictably achieving a goal based on a logical and specific set of how-to principles. The key being predictability. If it's been proven that by A you'll get the desired result of B, then all you need to do is A and continue to do A and continue to do A, and you'll get the desired result of B.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still a lot in that, though. You've still got to be willing to do the thing over and over and over again. That's why, when people put such a high value on doing what you're passionate about, right? Now, there's a saying that is it sounds true, but it's really not complete, and that is follow your passion. Do what you love, and you'll never work another day in your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really true. It's part true. I think you should do what you're passionate about. And these days there's a kind of pushback on that, saying, "Oh, don't worry about what you're passionate about. Just do the thing and you'll get passionate." I'm not sure I agree with that. I understand what they're saying, but I think there's an issue there that it's very, very. First of all, the complete thing is do what you're passionate about and find a marketplace who will pay you for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because you can be passionate about something, but if no one's willing to pay you for this service or this thing you're passionate for, you're going to have you're going to have a hobby, which is good, but it's not the same as a business. But I think that in order to be really master something, you've got to be passionate about it. You've got to enjoy it Because how can you do something over and over and over again if you really don't love it?
Right. So
you know,
true.
and that's where passion really comes in. It's that passion that makes it so it's not a chore to practice something, you know, hours and hours and hours a day. You actually love. You may not love every single thing about doing it, but you love it enough that you'll keep doing it until you master it.
Mm-hmm. And so when you think about your outstanding career, do you consider yourself at that point of mastery?
I don't know. It's a good question. In certain specific areas, I've certainly, you know, I've gotten good at certain things. I think as far as my topics, yes. But I'm not sure I could say that I have mastered them. I kind of see so many areas where there's room for improvement. Mm-hmm. So no, I guess I'd have to say no. I really haven't. But I'm still working at it.
Well, you know, I have to say I love asking that question because the people that I look up to say, wow, they're true masters. They're so growth-minded. They often don't see themselves as masters. And so I just want to thank you for sharing what I view as your mastery on sales and life and all of those great things. Thank you so much for sharing your time tonight. Bob, before we go, can you quickly tell people where they can find you after the show?
Sure. They can visit Burg, BURG.com. I like to keep things really simple.
Awesome. And I know that you're really active online. So Bob's got a Facebook page. Please check him out. There is a wealth of information. He's got podcasts. He's got videos. I mean, you name it. There is information out there. And Bob is just wonderful about sharing everything that he knows. Laura T. on Own Your Truth.
Preceding program was paid for by LMT Consulting, LLC, who is solely responsible for its content.